Professor Brendan Barnes, Vice Dean, Faculty of Humanities, Professor Lilly Nortje-Meyer, our inductee this evening, Professor Llewellyn Howes, Associate Professor of Mythology and Head of Department of Languages, Cultural Studies and Applied Linguistics here at UJ, senior leaders of the university, members of Senate and other academics, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Sanibonani, Goeienaand, good evening, Towel. It is indeed a great honor and a special privilege for me to welcome you to the Professorial Inaugural Lecture of Professor Lilly Nortje-Meyer. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to her loved ones, special guests, and her colleagues. This is indeed a proud and joyful, yet a landmark moment for all of you, for Professor Nortje-Meyer, and of course for us here at UJ and higher education in South Africa and beyond. The inauguration of professors is a public ceremony in which newly appointed professors are inducted into office by the Vice-Chancellor and deliver their inaugural addresses. The ceremony has its roots in the medieval university and serves multiple purposes. Firstly, it is an expression of welcome and entry for new professors joining the circle of colleagues who are already professors. Secondly, it provides a platform for the professors to display their expertise in the discipline and showcase their research. In isiXhosa we say, ukuthweswa isidanga kwisigaba sobujinga lwazi. This, loosely translated, refers to assuming the role of the professor. Of course, in colonial traditions subscribed to by universities, this refers to the gown and the cap. Traditionally, the wise one would accept a blanket, ingubo. Once we have listened to the inaugural address, the gown or ingubo donating the professorship will be formally assumed. Today, we gather to bear witness to entry of Professor Nortje-Meyer to the illustrious community of scholars at the university. It is a celebration of the contributions to the discipline and ultimately the impact on society. Professors provide a university with its identity, character, and academic legitimacy and integrity. The inaugural lecture is a rite of passage following the confirmation of the appointment of the person as a professor. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, we will listen to Professor Nortje-Meyer as the gown goes to town. By this, I mean that the power of the inaugural address is when the expertise is showcased beyond the corridors of the university and reverberates with society. It stands out as a moment of pride for the incumbent, the family, fellow scholars, the university, and ultimately society. For the German philosopher and diplomat Humboldt, a university referred to the whole community of scholars and students engaged in a common search for truth. Newman talked about teaching universal knowledge. Recently, universities have been viewed as instrumentalists serving the purpose of the economy or utilitarian in purpose. I would hope that we can break out of these narrow conceptualizations and reflect on the university as contributing to the public good. Edward said in an article, "On Defiance and Taking Positions," offers a formulation of the ideal role of the true intellectual as, and I quote, "one who commands a vast knowledge of his or her discipline, who is rigorous in the analysis of literature, who views being an intellectual as a vocation, the intellectual who considers it necessary to step into the public sphere and to speak truth to power, namely to question, interpret, and understand authority rather than consolidating it. To step out of the boundaries of the academy to connect oneself, to affiliate oneself, to align oneself with an ongoing process or contest of some sort, perhaps with the aim of improving the lot of the oppressed, the intellectual who functions as a kind of public memory to recall what is forgotten or ignored, to make connections that are otherwise hidden, and to provide alternatives for mistaken policies, close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, it remains then for us as a university with a Pan-African vision to derive our mandate as intellectuals and as professors. How do we embrace the role of a professor as a disruptor while continuing to be flagship carriers of our disciplines? This evening, we will listen to Professor Nortje-Meyer as one further step in the journey of being a professor. This is a journey which does not culminate once this lecture has been given. It is a self-reflective pause in the journey of the professor, with a promise of more to enrich our minds and simultaneously contributing to the rich intellectual body of work in the discipline. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite the Vice Dean, Professor Brendan Burns, to introduce Professor Nortje-Meyer. I thank you, Rialebua, Siabonga, Bayadanki.
Thank you, DVC Mpedi. Good evening. Sanibonani, Dumelang, Goeienaand. It's a real honor for me to introduce Professor Lilly Nortje-Meyer. Professor Lilly Nortje-Meyer obtained a B.Ed. honors from Rao in 1984 and a D.Lettered full from Rao in 1989. Her D.Lettered full was titled John the Baptist in the Fourth Gospel. She started her academic career as a junior lecturer in the Department of Biblical Studies at Rao in 1984, and since then moved through the rankings and was promoted to full professor in 2021. For 9 years, she served as the head of the Department of Religion Studies. Lilly's academic career started in the research field of the Gospel of John. She kept this interest throughout her career, but the approaches and focuses changed. The initial interest was a discussion of the narrative role of the character of John the Baptist in the Gospel of John. It soon changed to the role of women in the Gospel, followed by further interest in gender-critical readings, such as the mother of Jesus as an analytical category in John's Gospel. Recently, her focus shifted to ecofeminism as a research tool with a publication, The Logos as Flesh, in John 1:14 and 6:51-57, formulating a Christology for the liberation of animals from humanarchy. Other biblical texts were also read and interpreted gender-critically, namely the letter of Ephesians, the letter of Jude, and the Gospel of Matthew. Research on thematic topics were also published, namely heteronormativity, the family, effeminacy, constructions of religious knowledge, queer interpretations, and so forth. She has presented at numerous local as well as international research-based conferences. During her career, Lilly has supervised 10 mini-dissertations, 23 full master's dissertations, and 11 doctoral theses. She's still supervising 2 masters and 3 doctoral students. Lilly has published an impressive 32 single-authored and 10 co-authored accredited articles, 14 contributions to national and 4 international edited volumes. She's the guest editor of a number of international conference proceedings, including one by Cambridge Scholars Publishing that includes papers read at the feminist interpretation sessions of the International Society of Biblical Literature from 2018 to 2021. She's also currently in the process of co-editing yet another conference proceeding on violence against children, and this is organized by the Department of Religion Studies in collaboration with the NTSSA Gender and Sexuality subgroup. In terms of lecturing, Lilly started as a group class lecturer in 1980 in the Department of Biblical Studies at Rao, and as a part-time lecturer at the Soweto Teachers Training College. She also assisted the Faculty of Education with micro-lessons for biblical studies and religious instructions. For the past 38 years, wow, Lilly lectured on all undergraduate biblical studies and religion, as well as postgraduate biblical and Christian studies levels. Besides being an HOD, she has for the past 7 years the leader and organizer of the feminist interpretation group of the International Society of Biblical Literature. She has served as the executive secretary of the New Testament Society of South Africa, the first woman since the Society's foundation in 1963. And for 20 years, the leader of the NTSSA's Gender and Sexuality subgroup. Lilly has been invited by Professor Erik Eineckel from Regensburg in Germany to serve on the redaction committee of the revision of the International Bible Commentary. She will be responsible for the revision of the commentaries on the letter to the Ephesians and letter of Jude. Lilly has also served on numerous external evaluation panels. It is a huge honor for me to now invite Professor Lilly Nortje-Meyer to deliver her inaugural lecture.
Thank you so much, Professor Barnes, for the introduction. And from my side, thank you very much for everybody who came tonight to listen to my paper, those who are here in person, as well as those who are online. I really appreciate your attendance, and I hope that I will be able to communicate with you afterwards. There we are. I have included, if you had a copy of the summary of the paper, you will see that I have included an introduction of who Jude was or supposed to be. Just in very short, Jude introduced himself as the servant of Jesus Christ and the brother of James. So according to the tradition, Jude, although we doubt whether it is historical true, but the brother of James, and James was the head of the Christian church in Jerusalem, the first leader, and he was the brother of Jesus. And Jude was seemingly also the brother of James. And therefore, Jude might be also a younger brother of Jesus. So, well, this is what the tradition is saying. And it seems that Jude had to defend his authoritative position because there were intruders who came into the Christian community who attacked his authority, and therefore he felt obliged to defend not only himself, but the apostolic tradition that he was representing. So now, what I'm saying here in my paper is not a friendly word towards Jude, because from a gender perspective, I have to read biblical texts critically or gender critically. For the reason that authoritative texts are read in the church and are considered by people as guidelines, authoritative guidelines for life. And you know what? If you want to buy a new cell phone or a new car, you never take the Bible up and say what the Bible is saying and whether this is allowed or not. But the moment the relationship between men and women are on the table, the Bible is dragged closer, and then they say, no, look what's standing there in the Bible, and we have to follow this, very closely. So this is what I do, and this specific approach is then descriptions of nature and women as images of moral decline in the letter of Jude. So in very short is that Jude has used then these images of women's sexuality and nature, and he used this to verify his opponents. And he is doing it actually not in a very nice way. Well, let's start. Who can be blamed for the environmental crisis? Several perpetrators can be responsible for Earth's crisis, namely industrial development, the Industrial Revolution, Enlightenment, classical Greek traditions, and eventually Christianity itself. Christianity, its sacred text, and traditions were identified as the main reason for the environmental. For example, Lynn White accused Christianity of introducing and proclaiming an anthropocentric interpretation of biblical text and held Christianity responsible for the influence these interpretations had on the environment. Therefore, Christian theological thinking on salvation and redemptive history as documented in the Bible is seen as the base for the approach of Christians to the relationship between humans and Earth. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Karl Barth, Hans Kung, Oskar Kuhlmann, Gerhard von Rad, inter alia, are prominent theologians who had a significant impact on the formulation of the official church doctrine on earth, and their theology had an important impact on especially the anthropocentric approach of Western Christianity and thought. For example, according to them, the creation and acts of God in the history of Israel are aimed at the salvation of humans. Aquinas' doctrine on animals has been the dominant Western religious position since the 13th century. Aquinas, who followed Augustine and Aristotle, left this bitter legacy to Christian theology. Therefore, it might not be a single movement, theology, or ideology that is responsible for Earth crisis, but a combination of diverse influences. Resistance to the environmental crisis came from one of the early ecofeminists, namely Rosemary Radford Ruther, who has linked the domination of nature and the domination of women, and made insightful and passionate accounts of this interrelationship. Ruther identifies the underlying hierarchical dualisms of Western thought as responsible for the oppression of women and earth. Hierarchical dualisms. What are hierarchical dualisms? It is the idea that the whole universe is a composite of binary opposites. These opposites were relative dualisms organized as having an intrinsic hierarchical principle, where there is a primary principle and a secondary principle derived from it. Okuni Tierney says that all these domains, whether direction, space, time, people, color, or value, may be broadly classified by a binary opposition. Researchers have concluded that in many cultures, binary oppositions are a leading method of organization. We must keep in mind that cultures are not only using binary oppositions as a mode of classification. Trinary and other more complex modes of classification, as well as simultaneous presence of more than one mode of classification, may also be used. Dualisms or binary opposites were eventually established in classical Greek and employed by Christian and Western thought. It employs the assumption that androcentricity, male as central, female as peripheral, exclusivity, male as the focal point, female as marginal, isolation, male as self, female as other, and subjectification, male as agent and subject, female as passive object, are universal structures of language and representation. These androcentric binary systems are also reflected in hierarchical social cultural patterns and practices. In this binary way of normative and essential thinking, the principles stay the same, namely that the first principle is primary, dominant, and preferable, and the second principle is secondary, subservient, and inferior. It is called the master paradigm and is not a contemporary hermeneutical lens, but one that has been utilized since antiquity. The broader dualisms in religion are the two opposite powers that were responsible for the creation of the world, the universe. God, the primary principle, is the powerful, who stays in heaven above, who created the world below, including He created beginning, life, day, light, good, the sacred, etc. The male also as a primary principle represent God as the image of God in terms of being spiritual, active, powerful, having rationality, control, reason, honor, production, being subject, etc. Satan or evil is perceived as the opposite force involved in the creation and represents evil, end, death, night, darkness, the profane, powerlessness, etc. The binary opposite of the male, namely the female, signifies darkness, evil, she's the temptress, shame, being penetrated, cold, powerless, passive, reproductive, emotional, body, flesh, uncontrolled, being an object. Women and earth are from below. Therefore, earth share the secondary principles with women by being a necessity, nature, uncontrolled, animality, primitive, reproductive, material, and matter. Ruther thinks that the primary and implicit assumptions of this historical development is the male ideology of transcendent dualism. This means that reality and also the Christian community are seen in terms of a whole chain of dualistic relations, namely male-female, soul-body, spirit-matter, in which the second half of each pair is seen as alien and subject to the first. Ruther says rather further that the alien or other are women dominated by men, the exploitation of non-humans by the humans, the soul controlling the body, etc. These whole set of dualisms can be added to the social economical patterns of society, namely work, leisure, public-private, competition, nurture, business and politics versus morality and religion, or immoral society versus moral man. Methodology. Although all the principles of the Earth Bible Project are important in reading biblical text, I will focus on the principle of intrinsic worth, namely that the universe, the earth, and all its components have intrinsic value, and secondly, the principle of interconnectedness. The earth is a community of interconnected living things which are mutually dependent on each other for life and survival. Lewis Daly voices this interconnectedness as follows. First, the opposition of women and the opposition of nature are interconnected. Secondly, these connections must be uncovered in order to understand both the oppression of women and the oppression of nature. Third, feminist analysis must include ecological insights. And fourth, a feminist perspective must be part of any proposed ecological solution. The interconnectedness between women and nature, as indicated above, we acknowledge the interconnectedness between nature and women as secondary binary principles. Women and earth do not only share oppression, but also being bodies in terms of being matter, material, and flesh. Besides these binary principles, women and earth are sharing the use of language also provides evidence of this interconnectedness. For example, Warren mentions that scholars have provided critiques of the language used to describe women and nature. To subordinate women, they are described in animal terms such as bitches, cows, saws, chicks, serpents, old bats, shrews, pussycats, etc. You can fill on the list. However, language which feminizes nature is also used. For example, we say Mother Nature is raped, mastered, conquered, mined. Her secrets are penetrated and her womb is to be put into service of the man of science. Virgin timber is fell and cut down. Fertile soil is tilled and land that lies fallow is barren and useless. In this way, the exploitation of earth is justified by feminizing them. In tandem, the exploitation of women is justified by naturalizing them. Carol Adams also argues that language which feminizes nature and naturalizes women describes, reflects, and perpetuates patriarchal oppression by failing to see the extent to which the twin dominations of women and nature, especially of animals, are in fact culturally analogous and not simply metaphorically analogous. Richlin reports a male scholar who remarked that women, like dogs, are somehow outside history, doing nothing that could make a mark on the historical record. The following discussion of Jude's use of images to humiliate his opponents are demonstrations of the interconnectedness of women and earth. The use of the negative sexual images related to women and the negative images imposed upon nature confirm the master paradigm of dualisms, where women and earth share the lower status of the secondary principle. Jude's use of effeminacy as the rhetorical strategy. The rhetorical strategy used by the author of Jude to humiliate his opponent is by accusing them of sexual depravity and comparing them to nature. He uses the most destructive vilification onslaught to defend his honor and the Christian tradition that was challenged by the opponents and to dishonor them. Although there were men in antiquity who displayed behaviors such as being soft, effeminate, sexually passive, weak, deceitful, cowardly, and incapable of virtue, none of these characteristics of the intruders have been mentioned and used by Jude. His accusations are that the opponents are licentious, committing fornication and pursuing unnatural lust, defiling the flesh, indulging their own lust and ungodly lust, following their natural instincts, and wearing clothing stained by corrupted flesh. In antiquity and even today, many have sexual freedom and are exempted from adultery and unfaithfulness to their wives. It is only women who are labeled as a temptress because they cannot control themselves sexually. Therefore, moral corruption was strongly connected to a woman's sexual behavior and to the female body. Charges of immorality, such as sexual depravity and adultery, were cliches of effeminacy used for members of the Christian communities who disrupted the peace, as well as syncretists and apostates. This rhetorical technique is also well known in prophetic literature such as Jeremiah 3 and Ezekiel 16. Jude's rhetorical onslaught also includes implicit vilification by using examples from canonical and non-canonical literature as indications of the opponent's moral decline and corruption. Not all the examples have the same degree of sexual suggestions, but Voltaire indicates that the Jewish tradition would interpret most of the examples in essential context. For example, the fall and punishment of the angels in Jude 6 indicate that the angels have intercourse with earthly women and were punished for their sin. The reference to the way of Cain in verse 11 refers to an evil life that is sensual, selfish, and hateful. According to tradition, the descendants of Cain were in the habit of walking abroad naked and gave themselves up to every conceivable manner of lewd practices. In the reference of Sodom and Gomorrah in verse 7, in Jude verse 7, that compromises the strongest and most condemning examples of licentiousness in the Bible. Genesis 19 is traditionally listed among those Old Testament references condemning same-sex identities and activities. Alternatively, it is also interpreted as referring to the failure to provide protection and hospitality, or the flesh of a different kind, namely angelic flesh. However, the sin Jude had in mind was not a lack of hospitality, but sexual depravity, because he refers to the sin of pursuing unnatural lusts. In Jude 24, the reference to being without blemish is a sexual image of purity. It refers to the father's mastery of his daughter's sexuality and his guarantee that she will be a virgin at her wedding. Deuteronomy 22, verse 13 to 21 stipulates that if the daughter is not a virgin, she should be stoned at her father's doorstep by the men of the city. Ephesians 5, 5 verse 27 and Revelations 21 verse 2 describe the image of an unblemished bride or woman, indicating the immaculate morality of Christian community and the church's faithfulness to Christ. Israel's faithfulness to Yahweh is also portrayed as a virgin in Jeremiah 18 and 31 and the virgin daughter of Zion in Isaiah 37. Jude describes the loyal members of the community as analogous to unblemished brides, representing the ascetic ideal, while the behavior of the opponents is associated with immoral women. This demonstrates the patriarchal ideology concerning female sexuality at the time. This is a typical patriarchal text, excluding explicit references to women, while using images of female sexual depravity to humiliate the opponents. They were deemed synonymous with everything negative associated with women and female sexuality. Jude's use of images from nature as a rhetorical strategy. Jude uses also metaphors taken from nature to demonstrate the sinful character of his opponents. The metaphors of the waterless clouds and the trees without fruit have female connotations of barrenness. Fruit-bearing trees are a symbol of the beloved and valued women, for example in the Song of Songs and the Psalms. Water is the ultimate life giver, and without water there is no life on earth, which is a strong reference to women. The same applies to fruit trees without fruit. Both metaphors indicate barrenness and complete uselessness. The promises of rain in the clouds, watering the trees to bear fruits, have been eliminated by the wind, which has blown away the clouds, and the trees without fruit have been uprooted. In ancient society, a barren woman was regarded as a useless woman. In addition, a wife who could not bear a son to her husband was considered useless and could be rejected, isolated in the family, or even divorced. However, Jude's rhetoric not only demonstrates androcentrism but also anthropocentrism, signifying the domination of humans over nature. Ecofeminists like Warren see domination as a sort of dictatorship in the sense that humans rule over the natural environment and have the right to manage the environment as they wish, perceiving the value of nature as solely instrumental. With the attitude of superiority, humans not only are allowed to exploit Earth and its natural resources, but assume that it is our legitimate right as superior agents, heirs and controllers of God's creation, to dominate the less valuable, less prestigious and lower stages in nature. Darkness. Jude verse 6 and 13 indicate that the blackest darkness has been preserved for the sinners and that they will be bound with everlasting change for judgment on the great day. That is Judgment Day. The theological connotations, especially in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, is that darkness contrasts with light and has the connotation of evil and condemnation. Light signifies God, life, joy, and blessings. Darkness indicates evil, sin, grief, misfortune, pain, and death. Darkness is associated with evil deeds. For example, in Ephesians 5:11, the fruitless deeds of darkness indicate bad conduct and spiritual deadness. From an ecological perspective, darkness is part of the life circle on Earth. There are organisms and animals that are nocturnal. They require dark conditions for reproductive, defensive, and communication purposes. Therefore, darkness is an important resource and an environmental condition for all living creatures and organisms. As there are day creatures, there are also nocturnal or night creatures such as mammals, birds, and insects. The leopard, aardvark, pangolin, caracal, porcupine, etc. are nocturnal mammals. Nocturnal birds include the owl, nightjar, nightingale. Most frogs and insects like moths are nocturnal. These creatures do their hunting and eating at night. They are well equipped to see and live in dark conditions. Even plants or organisms that are exposed to ultraviolet radiation during daylight need periods of darkness, providing time for photorepair. allowing overstimulated cells to recover and heal. Without a period of darkness, these plants and organisms experience reduced growth and lower reproductive success. Dark circles and natural light have existed throughout evolutionary time, and many organisms have evolved behaviors that are signaled by or are dependent upon darkness. In both plants and marine systems, the germination of seeds and hatching of eggs depends on photoperiod hints. That means that they are linked to several seasonal developmental processes to initiate reproductive and vegetative organs. Fire. In Jude 7, the punishment for the sinners is to suffer the eternal fire. In the Hebrew Bible and New Testament, fire is used as an indication of destructive punishment. Since the flood, God had promised never to destroy the earth with water again, but the final judgment will be by fire. Nobody can escape the blazing heat of a fire. For the unremorseful, it would mean total, inescapable destruction. But fire was also used to indicate the process of purification. For those who repent, it would mean a refining or purification which would result in salvation. Fire is therefore a means to holiness. Fire is also used in the Hebrew Bible to characterize Yahweh. Grant says that Israel's old poetic and prophetic literature portrayed divine fire as Yahweh's breath, mouth, and tongue. The Bible's narrative texts portray Yahweh using fire as a means to eat, transport, travel, speak, and see. It indicates how Yahweh interacts physically with the people and the world. For example, the burning bush in Exodus 3, Yahweh's descendants on Mount Sinai in fire, he travels with Israel in the desert in a column of fire, and many more. Similar to Mesopotamian gods and kings, Yahweh's body is associated with fire. People of Israel were not allowed to see him directly or to approach him, because the divine fire is a rhetorical sign of Yahweh's presence and power. In the New Testament, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the early believers was also visible as tongues of fire. Earth, nature, and humans cannot escape the ecological importance and benefits of fire. Earth is a unique fire planet, and humans are unique fire creatures, and the ecology of their interaction is both ancient and profound. Fire on earth is a feature of the living world, and it emerged out of the nature of life on earth. Life created the oxygen that ignites the fire and provides the hydrocarbon fuels that feed and sustain it. Since the early humans or hominin discovered how to make and control fire, the evolution process escalated. They could cook grains to make them more edible and consumable. Humans could move into the uninhabitable cold places and use fire to keep warm, keep predators away, clearing land, and they could also use fire as light in the night. Fire had marked transformative changes in human existence. Fire plays an important role in nutrition cycling, the diversity maintenance, and the habitat structure. The suppression of fire can lead to unforeseen changes in ecosystems that often adversely affect the plants, animals, and humans that depend upon that habitat. Many ecosystems benefit from periodic fires because they clear out dead organic material, and some plant and animal populations require the benefits fire brings to survive and reproduce. Trees, plants, and flowers, like certain types of lilies or the fynbos in the Western Cape, also require fire for seed germination. Pollution. In Jude 8, the author says the opponents pollute their own bodies with their behavior, referring to the discussion above on sexual behavior. It means that they are morally corrupt. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6 that to commit adultery is to sin against your own body. But believers could be purified, meaning cleansed and made holy by the ritual of the washing of water or baptism or through fire. Today, humans are responsible for polluting the environment. The air we breathe is polluted with toxic gases and smoke. CO2 or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere contributes to global warming, and plastic is polluting the soil, water sources, the sea, affecting all natural life. Recently, it was discovered by scientists that there is microplastic in the lung tissue of living humans. Polypropylene, used by packaging and pipes, and PET, commonly used for beverage bottles, were the two most common types of plastic found. If it is found in humans, it will also be found in the lung tissues of animals. Polluting the environment on this scale means that humans destroy their own living body, namely the cosmos. Trees. Jude 12 compares the opponents with autumn trees without fruits and uprooted. This refers to fruit trees that produce no fruits to be harvested and were useless for their owners and considered dead. Even though the tree for some reason do not bear fruit, they are never useless because they can still provide protection for humans and especially animals, firewood for cooking, and warmth that are essential to living creatures. Plants, and especially trees, are frequently used as metaphors and as reference to real plants in the Hebrew Bible and New Testament. The first humans started their lives in the Garden of Eden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil plays a significant theological role in the history of biblical humans. The cedars of Lebanon were frequently mentioned in the Hebrew Bible in a figurative sense, used for purification and building material. The story of the two lovers in the Song of Songs is situated in a garden surrounded by fruit trees, flowers, and herbs. In the New Testament, fruit trees and their fruits are often used to indicate the good or bad deeds of people, resulting in destroying the bad tree. Plants were the first forms of life on earth. Without plants, human and animal existence is not possible. Plants provide inter alia oxygen, food, medicine, and shelter. They influence the land formation, influence climate change, forest ecology, water consumption and availability, and living space for all creatures. Plants are responsible for absorbing water from the ground and evaporating it through their leaves into the atmosphere. Plants, like humans and animals, have a limited lifetime and will die eventually. Plants, animals, and humans are incontestably interconnected. Water. The opponents of Jude are described as clouds without rain, blown along by the wind, and wild waves of the sea foaming up their shame. In regions where people, especially farmers, depend on rain, clouds that come but do not have rain are signs of destruction and hopelessness. Drought and rainy seasons are life circles and contributed to the evolution of Earth. Wild waves are interpreted by Rees as a storm that seems out of control and has the sense of danger. The danger of a sea storm is only relevant to humans and not to the sea itself. It is a natural phenomenon in the way the sea functions. No life on Earth is possible without water. The earliest form of life emerged in the seas and from there evolved onto land. There are mainly two explanations given to the origin of water on Earth. First, a large quantity of water would have been in the material which formed the Earth, and asteroids up to a few hundred kilometers across that collided with the Earth seem the most likely sources of Earth's water. When Genesis 1 is read closely, it does not record that Yahweh created water. It seems that the water was already existing and that Yahweh has only separated the water. Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. In Genesis 1 verse 6 and Genesis 1 verse 7. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. In Jude 13, the opponents are also compared with wandering stars. Stars were used as a point of reference for land and sea travelers to direct them to their destination. Wandering or moving stars will lead travelers astray and they will get lost. Fry says that the elliptical orbits of the planets were perceived in the ancient world as irregular, according to the explanations of the Enoch tradition, are a sign that the order of the cosmos is crumbling in the days of the sinners. Moving stars is an illusion because it's not the stars that move, but the rotation of Earth that gives the impression that the stars are moving. The biblical text doesn't make a difference between stars and planets that revolve around a star in a definite path, and that is the orbit. The term star is used in the Bible for any luminous non-terrestrial body other than sun and moon. Unreasonable animals and Balaam's donkey. In verse 10, Jude accuses his opponents that they do not understand the things they are speaking abusively against, and says they only understand these things by instinct, like unreasonable animals. However, in verse 11, he refers to the error of Balaam, and by implication to the donkey of Balaam, who has demonstrated better reasoning than Balaam. Balaam's error in verse 11 refers to Balaam's counseling of Balak, the king of Moab, to entice the Israelites to practice lewdness. Jewish traditional exegetes equally criticize Balaam as having accepted the invitation of Balak out of greed for the large rewards promised to him. For instance, large fees for divination and promises of great honor. In these traditions, Balaam embodies a type of hater, greed, recalcitrance, villainy, and a lack of understanding and disconcernment of the will of God. Although the donkey plays an important part in Numbers 22, she is not mentioned in Jude. But the story of Balaam has little significance without the story of his accompanying donkey. In Numbers 22, the donkey is used as a kind of divine agent. In contrast with Balaam, his donkey displays insight and knowledge of the will of God. 3 times the angel tried to prevent Balaam to continue his journey to Balak, but each time it was only the donkey who saw the angel and tried to distract the journey. In his anger, greed, and lack of understanding, Balaam struck the donkey each time, forcing the animal back on the road. When the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey and she complained about the abuse, it is only then that Balaam saw the angel, who said to him, "I've come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me." Donkey saw the angel and turned away 3 times, preventing the angel to kill Balaam. The function of this story is to mock the prophet Balaam. The donkey becomes the true prophet in the sense that the donkey is on a higher spiritual level than Balaam because she wants to protect him from his evil and unacceptable intentions to curse Israel for monetary gain. In a recent report, it is said that 4.8 million donkeys worldwide are slaughtered for their skins. Collagen extracted from the skin of donkeys is used in traditional Chinese medicine. According to the report, 10 million communities worldwide are depending on donkeys as workforce. When the donkeys are stolen, women and girls have to do the donkey work. In the hierarchy of dualisms, animals are seen as inferior to humans and of lesser worth. Therefore, from an anthropocentric perspective, humans can treat animals as they wish because animals are purely instrumental for human purposes and to be mastered. This is demonstrated by Balaam, who struck the donkey 3 times out of anger and even would kill the animal easily if he had a sword in his hand. Conclusion. The letter is highly problematic to feminists and ecofeminists. The author demonstrates androcentrism and anthropocentrism by using extensive negative images of women's sexuality and negative images of nature to humiliate his opponents. In the master paradigm of dualisms, the dominant male exercises authority and mastery over women and earth, and which is clearly demonstrated in the letter of Jude. Earth has intrinsic value. Earth or nature does not need humans to exist, but humans cannot live without nature. McFay views the world as interdependent and all bodies, living and non-living, as interconnected, interdependent and valuable. Radebe also emphasizes the core values of interconnectedness, relatedness and eventually justice. These underlying androcentric and anthropocentric ideologies of authoritative texts need to be exposed and criticized to alert faith communities to the harmful effect these ideologies have on the human female, on earth, and on justice. I thank you.
Thank you, Lily. That was wonderful to hear, and it is a real honor for me to respond to that paper. I would like to start by talking about you. If you know Lily, you know that she's a person who loves animals. Her dogs are like her children, and she would talk your ears off your head about her dogs, and it's always lovely to hear about them. She also, always when she goes on holiday, she would love to go somewhere in nature. And I love this picture of you, by the way, because it's you in nature with your dogs. I don't know if the online audience can see. I'm sure they can. Another thing about Lily is she's a pioneer. She was the first person the first female person to publish an article in New Testamentica on a woman or female subject in South Africa, or in the world, because it's one journal, in 1986. She was the first woman to get a doctorate degree in New Testament studies in South Africa. And then throughout her career, through feminism and gender studies, she has had an impact in not only the science of New Testament studies, but also in South Africa, practically on the ground. And I can give many examples. I won't bore you. I can maybe talk about Lily's fight for the rights of homosexuals. I can talk about her recent work on mothering, which is a topic that was introduced by her in South Africa. I can talk about how her students see her as a mother, which is something that comes out in teaching evaluations. I can also talk about her fight for the equal rights of genders and the different sexes. Then she was also the first female chair of the New Testament Society of Southern Africa. And that is a great achievement in 2018. And as far as I know, she's the first scholar to tackle the topic of ecofeminism in South Africa. So in all of these fields and many more that I could have listed, Lily is a true pioneer. My response will be interdisciplinary. I chose to take an interdisciplinary approach because in Lily's paper, she speaks about interconnectedness. And her paper itself is also, in a way, interdisciplinary because she goes beyond just analysis of the texts, but looks at ecology, evolution, biology, etc. So I want to focus on mythology. And in Lily's paper, she speaks about the classical Greek world. And she says that in the classical world, there are many examples of the patriarchal society, many traditions. And one of those traditions is, of course, the letter to Jude. There are many others, and I'm going to focus to support and buttress her case. I'm going to focus on one specific mythological tradition in the ancient Greek culture. But my interdisciplinary approach is going to go beyond just mythology. And I'm also going to include a bit of evolution, a bit of psychology, and a bit of neuroscience. And I want to start with this guy, Carl Jung, which I'm sure all of you know. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, psychologist, but also an interpreter of ancient myths. And Carl Jung argued for something called the collective unconscious, that all of us in humanity are connected, interconnected, by similar ideas, similar worldviews. And he found these in archetypes in ancient myths. Archetypes like similar events, similar characters, similar traditions, similar themes being incorporated in different myths across the world. Now, I believe that anthropocentrism, man in the middle, or humans in the middle, humans in the center, the world revolves around humans, that idea, as well as the idea of androcentrism, man in the middle, the world revolves around men and not women, as well as the whole mindset of having a patriarchal society living in according to patriarchal values. Those three ideas, I think, are also archetypes in the Jungian sense. And now I'm going to jump, and just bear with me, to evolution. So primates have patriarchal societies. Gorillas and chimpanzees have typically patriarchal societies. But then there are very few primates that have matriarchal societies, like bonobos. So if you look at those pictures, the one on the left, that's the bonobo. The top one is the gorilla, and the other one is the chimpanzee. And humans started evolving around 2 million years ago. Primates started evolving about 15 million years ago. And we are all descended from ancestors of primates. So these patriarchal ideas, these ideas that society should live in a way that is dominated by the male species, doesn't start from our human history. We should go back further. Our brains evolved in a way because of our evolution to think in a certain way, and it has started to make up who we are as a human species. There's a very good quote that I actually want to read here. Before I do that, let me just quickly say, what evolutionary and biologists and evolutionary anthropologists argue and see in nature is that that because males are physically stronger, it is very prominent for them to coerce and to force women in certain ways. So that happens in the animal kingdom, and it's part of our evolutionary history as well. Let me read you the quote. So this is from Barbara Smits. She says, "Evidence from other primates of male sexual coercion and female resistance to it indicates that the sexual conflicts of interest that underlie patriarchy predate the emergence of the human species. Humans, however, exhibit more extensive male dominance and male control of female sexuality than is shown by most other primates." Interesting. Now I'm going to jump again. Because of our evolutionary history, our brain evolved in a certain way. And as most of you would know, we have 3 brains, really. We have the reptilian brain, which is the brain that is all about survival and all about reproduction. We have the mammalian brain, which is also the limbic system and controls emotions, empathy, and parental emotions, and the need to be good parents, and so on. Then we've got the human brain, where things like logic, abstract thought, are used. So these three parts of the brain is part of our history. We were primates. We still are primates. And patriarchy is ingrained in us. And I'm going to come back to this because it sounds very negative, but I promise it's not. I'm going to come back. So let me now move on to the mythology part. And excuse me for jumping around, but it's all going to come together. I want to focus on the myth of Demeter and Persephone. So Demeter was the goddess of the fertility of the soil and the fecundity of the earth. She was the mother of Persephone. So Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, but also the daughter of Zeus. So Demeter and Zeus were sexual partners, but they were also brother and sister. And there was a lot of that hanky-panky going on in Greek mythology. And Persephone, Persephone was also caught in this gender war between Zeus and Demeter. Hades was the king of the underworld. And Hades fancied Persephone. He really liked her. And one day, he was also the king of the underworld, and he was also the brother of Zeus. So Demeter, Hades, and Zeus were all siblings. Now one day Persephone is walking, picking flowers, minding her business. And Hades appears from the underworld, out of nowhere. And he abducts Persephone, takes her to the underworld, rapes her, and forces her to be his wife. Demeter can't find her daughter. She searches for her daughter all over the earth, can't find her. And because Demeter is the goddess of the fertility of the earth, and she's so sad and distraught over the disappearance of her daughter, the earth stops producing agricultural produce. And remember that farmers were dependent on Demeter in their own religion for survival because of Demeter, because she is the goddess of fertility. So she stops producing, or she stops making the earth fertile, which means that all these farmers, and in the ancient world, 80 to 90% of people were farmers, meaning the whole humanity faces starvation. She searches, she can't find her. Eventually, she hears what happened, and she goes to Zeus, and she asks Zeus, her brother, please, can you help me? Can you get my daughter back from the underworld? And Zeus, the patriarchal ruler of the divine realm that he is, sides with his brother Hades. And the only trump card that that Demeter has is her ability to make the earth fertile. So she uses that, and she threatens to never again make the earth fertile. And now humanity is in a major crisis, and they are going to starve. So they reach a compromise. Persephone can come up to see her mother for a part of the year. And for the other part of the year, she must remain with Hades. So every year, Persephone would come and see her mother, and they would reunite. But then she has to go back to her abusive husband in an unhappy marriage. And this is the Greek mythological explanation for where the seasons come from. So, when Persephone is with her mother, Demeter is happy, and she makes the earth fertile, and farmers can farm, and and humanity can continue. But when she goes back to the underworld, there's no more fertility of the earth, and that is the explanation of the seasons. And this is all, by the way, about agriculture and agricultural produce. So, how do we interpret all of this, linking to what Lily's lecture was about? And I want to start with anthropocentrism. So in the story, humans are central. It is all about the survival of humans. The emphasis is not on the fertility of the soil for the sake of nature. It is not on the fertility of the soil for the sake of animals. The emphasis is on human survival. Because humans are in the middle. They are most important according to that mindset, according to that worldview. Androcentrism. The needs of Persephone and Demeter are subordinated to the needs of Hades and Zeus. Zeus's need for power and control trumps Demeter's need to just be with her daughter. Hades' need for sexual gratification trumps Persephone's need to just be with her mother and just be happy and free and young and innocent. What I really like about this myth is that it connects nature and gender very well. We can see that the suffering of women is a direct result of the suffering of nature. The suffering of nature is a direct result of the suffering of woman. The earth fails to continue to be a viable resource because of the selfish needs of these two male gods. Also the myth, it fails to acknowledge the intrinsic worth of the two female goddesses. Demeter and Persephone are only viewed in terms of being instruments, being objects. Demeter is only valuable in as far as she can produce fertility and provide human survival, or provide for human survival. Persephone is only valuable and valued in as far as she can fulfill the sexual needs of Hades. They are not really people, they are instruments. Nature is devalued. The intrinsic worth of nature is devalued to the extent that it's also only an instrument for the survival of humans. Not important and valuable in itself, but only valuable in as far as it can provide for us. And this is where it takes a turn. Despite our biology, despite our history, despite our evolutionary and human histories, how we conduct ourselves in the world is not deterministic. In other words, our biology does not determine who we are. Because remember, even though the patriarchal worldview goes back to primates and it's part of our evolutionary history, the biggest part of our brain, the last part of our brain, is the human brain. The part of our brain where we can think and reason and value. The part of our brain where we can challenge preconceived notions like patriarchy. The part of our brain where we can think about presuppositions that we learned from a young age. The part of our brains where we can stand up and move beyond our human nature, or what society tells us we should or should not know or believe. Society has come a long way. In the last few decades, we have challenged more stereotypes than ever. We are on an upwards trajectory. We must just be careful not to be so woke that we try to outwoke each other and in the process harm other people. You know what I mean? But we are not, our behavior, our attitudes, our worldview are not determined by our history or our biology. It is determined by our love for our fellow human beings. We can live in a world where everyone's equal, where all people are equal. We can also live in a world where we are just one of the species in nature, not its king, not its master, not its ruler, but only one of all of the wonderful species that we have on this planet. And now I come full circle back to Lilly. It is because of researchers and pioneers like Lilly, with focus on gender equality, the rights of the LGBTQI plus community. It is because of her research on ecofeminism that we can build a foundation, and not just hers, of course, but she contributes hugely, because of pioneers like her, that we can build a better world, that we can use that part of our brains that says, you are not better. You're not better than your fellow human being. You're not better than nature, but part of it. So Lilly, thank you for the contribution you have made over the last, I don't know how many decades. We all thank you, and it was really a pleasure for me to respond to your paper. Thank you very much. Thanks.
They say preachers preach, and I say teachers teach. We heard about farmers and farming. Of course, farmers should farm. I'm not qualified to say more about some of these goddesses that I think I'm well qualified to say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that professors should profess, and Professor Nortje-Meyer professed this evening. Congratulations, colleague, and I invite you to give her a warm round of an applause. So I would like to take this opportunity and congratulate our inductee this evening. You know, events like this tell me and should tell us that our university is alive and well. You know, universities that do not have events like this where they induct professors, you know, they should be worried because it shows the university does not have a future. So for me, it shows that the University of Johannesburg is alive and well. And professors don't only profess for the university where they are employed, but they profess for the academy, isn't it? So it also tells us that the academy is alive and well. So congratulations once again, Professor Nortje-Meyer. The journey of becoming a professor is a long, hard, and lonely one. That much I can tell you. And I can see Prof Bans is nodding. It's not easy. And it's not only professors that I can tell you how difficult it is to get to this stage, but I'm sure the loved ones can attest to this, because they are the ones that suffer. And one cannot achieve this without their love and support. So I'd like to take this opportunity and thank your family, to thank you, sir, and your family for the support you provided to Professor Nortje-Meyer, for her to be able to do what she does best. You can see that she's passionate about what she's doing. She loves what she's doing. And this kind of passion cannot come out like it did tonight if there's no love and support, from those close to you, particularly family. But there are also friends that we like to acknowledge, because, as you proceed with this journey, there will always be people you talk to. It could be academic friends, or even people who pretend to understand what you're talking about while they don't understand a thing. But they give us support and encouragement. I'm sure you have a few prof that supported you. We also want to thank them this evening for their support, and I'm sure also encouragement. There are also some friends, that I would like, or friends that I would like to acknowledge from the, the university, your colleagues, but also outside of this university, colleagues all over the world. I heard Regensburg being mentioned and so on. Without this kind of support from colleagues, one cannot do what one loves, because you cannot talk to yourself. Sometimes you need people that you can bounce, ideas with, and they can tell you that, no, this is not, it doesn't sound right, and then you can go back to the drawing board and so on. And we like to acknowledge them this evening. I cannot pretend to know much, and it's not my role to comment about Jude, but one thing I can say, it sounded clearly to me that this person was really rude, I mean, calling people unreasonable animals is just not polite, That who am I to comment on this kind of people? Colleagues, things like this are not possible without the support and leadership of, those that do this thankless job. Prof Barnes, I'm looking at you, and also Professor Kamila Naidu, knowing her, the executive dean, will go and look at this video to see how we performed. So I'm addressing her, I'm looking straight at the camera. One of my lecturers in leadership said something that stayed with me, that I know, Prof House, you talk about farmers and farming, but this professor said, farmers don't produce crops or whatever livestock, but what they do, they create an environment where crops can thrive. And I think this is what leaders like yourself, Prof Barnes, leaders like Professor Naidu are doing. They provide an environment where colleagues like Prof Nortje-Meyer can thrive and be the best that they can be. Without such an environment, it's difficult to arrive at this stage if there is no support. So I would like to acknowledge you. I would like to acknowledge Prof Naidu and all the colleagues that provide leadership at the faculty to provide that environment where colleagues can thrive. She should not be the last. We would like to induct more from your faculty and other faculties. I also wish to take this moment to acknowledge you, Prof House, and thank you for your response. It gave me, a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure Prof Nortje-Meyer will reflect some more on the things you have said, and also the colleagues who are present here, and also those that are watching from wherever they may be. So thank you very much. I also want to take this opportunity on behalf of the University of Johannesburg to thank you, colleagues, for joining us this evening, but also to thank all of you who joined us virtually. We do not take your support for granted as the University of Johannesburg. We really like it when people take interest in the great work that we are doing and see exceptional colleagues that we have, professors like Professor Nortje-Meyer did this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, these events, do not organize themselves. There are lots of people that operate behind the scenes that I always want to acknowledge. We stand in front here and look good, but this would not be possible without the support of colleagues that I do not want to mention by names, because then I forget one or two, then I'm in trouble, but you know yourselves. Thank you very much, colleagues. I mean, this seamless production is just amazing because of the dedication of people like yourself, the invites, the pictures, memories, the recordings that we'll keep and treasure for years to come would not be possible if you're not here. So we really appreciate it. Lastly, colleagues, we hope to see you again at one of our events. This should not be the last. Please support many other events organized by this institution. We really want you to walk this journey as the University of Johannesburg with us and share in our joy and also witness the great work that we are doing. So thank you very much. Till next time, have a great evening. Bye-bye.